Hi and welcome to the PK52 podcast channel. Yeah, I mean, I saw like a lot of changes coming through this year and like growing, which is really fantastic.
Yeah.
I want to start asking you some of like the main topics coming with this fast growing and changing is about the self-tape. So how you can build a successful tape, like technically talking, but also like from a performing point of view.
I think self-tape is very much here to stay in regards to, it was something that obviously happened before the pandemic, but now it is there to kind of stay. And I think the main thing to kind of say is there's two different debates. I think actually there's been a recent article by Olivia Colman that's saying, you know, it's much better to be in the room and I prefer that. But that's an option that's not always given. So I think it's really important to, you know, be as one with a self-tape as you possibly can. There are opportunities to be back in the room, especially around kind of theatre. I think we appreciate that that's a slightly difficult skill sometimes to audition with that kind of side of the industry. And obviously as you go down the process, maybe if you get into chemistry reads and things like that, casting directors will be doing, you know, the latter stages of the casting in person. But as you say, self-tape is kind of here to stay. And I would, this is going to sound, it's like a contradicting myself, but equipment is important, but also not to worry about things so much. The thing that we get told by the casting directors so often is as long as you have it very clearly, a clear kind of background as much as you possibly can, and it goes for the fundamentals, the sound, the lighting, the framing. Many people still are off slightly with their framing. It is still just, you know, your head and shoulders, which is predominantly, unless, of course, the casting director specifies something else. If they have in their instructions said something different, you must always follow those instructions. But it's more about, and again, cliche, it is about the performance. I'll get questions about the reader or, you know, like, oh, they haven't done a good enough job or this or that. Forget all of that. Casting directors are going to tune all of that out. All they're looking for is that performance and that, you know, bringing that character to life, whatever character you've been given. Don't worry about nods to costume or in terms of kind of, you know, making sure that you've got certain elements, if there's instructions within the script. Really don't worry about that. It's about the performance fundamentally. So when you are doing a self-tape, I think stress levels automatically rise when you get something. Although it's great, the email comes into your inbox and you feel that kind of, okay, this must be done right here, right now. So I always say to people, if you can, in your house, in your flat, wherever you are, just have a place where you can go to do your self-tape. So you know how to set it up, you know where everything is, get that all ready, get that all centered, and then go through the piece, you know, learning the lines. I think off-book is as preferable as it can be because sometimes it is impossible if you've got lots and lots of scenes, but just being off-book means that you aren't just looking down or, you know, anything like that. You are actually reacting. And I think that's a really key thing in a self-tape is sometimes it's not just the words that you are saying, it's the way that you are reacting to the other lines coming in. And again, it sounds very, very basic, but I do see people in their own heads. You can see them kind of already preempting the next, the next line or whatever that might be. In life, like we are now, you don't know what I'm going to say and I don't know what you're going to say. So you have that natural reaction. And I try and say to people, try and do that as much as possible. So when you haven't got a self-tape, practice. I know that's really off-putting. A lot of us don't like watching ourselves back on camera, but it's amazing even just from watching tapes back, the little nuances. Like I'm a very physical person, so I have my hands move and things like that. And the camera picks up everything. So you want to just really focus in on the slightest of movements can change a performance. So even if classes, you know, you can't fundamentally afford maybe a screen acting class, there's many expensive things out there. There's still stuff that you can do to kind of like keep practicing the craft and all that kind of stuff. But basically going back to the self-tape, I would say, first and foremost, the setup of kind of lighting, sound and framing are the key things to really, really think about. Then performance-wise, taking your time and really making sure that if it's not going away, if the take's just not really there, just stop and come back to it. Try not to rush it too much. Like if it's not working, it might be for another reason. You're hungry, you're tired, you need a bit of fresh air, do something else and then come back to it. I always think that that's sometimes, even with work, that's the best way to approach things. So that's a very long-winded answer, but hopefully that makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah, it does. And I was thinking, like, when you prepare this audition, can you use like your physicality as something that characterize so making your own things be part of the character sometimes, and also sometimes use some prompt, like if, I don't know, let's say you have audition for be a psychologist. You might take a notepad, you might not see because the frame is on the table, but you use that movement to put yourself mentally in believing that you are actually there. Because I think that sometimes the toughest part is like, you're reading the script and say you are in the middle of the woods, yeah, and you have a client in the middle of the woods, which is already something weird. And you're taking notes, I don't know, mixing the nature and psychology features in there. And it's like, okay, I'm sitting in my room with a white background and there's no trees. And I'm sitting and actually maybe there with standing, let's say something like it. And I need to fit that one in the sitting position and make it happen like it was something else, like in my imagination.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point, is like the nod to a certain character, because you focus, I think, so quickly on the words sometimes with a self-tape that taking that step back and just thinking a little bit about the character, what mannerisms they might have, what mood they're in the scene, you know, those kind of fundamentals. I think sometimes you get a script and you're so immersed in those words that you don't take that original step back. Many of the time you will have maybe details of the character, a little bit of what they're asking. So maybe just take a little bit of, you know, a few 5-10 minutes just improvising, you know, just kind of seeing the flow and what that kind of character, what you feel, what could be their kind of traits and things like that, and then get into the script. You don't have to just launch straight into the script sometimes, you know, you can take that. That's what self-tape does give you. It gives that opportunity for you to be, in a sense, the director, the person who you know, takes the lead on, you know, how you want to do it. Because when you're in an in-person audition, you've got a time, you've learnt your words, you turn up, you do your scene, sometimes you might get redirected, and then that's it. So obviously you don't want to spend your whole day doing the self-tape, but you can remember the power, and I think this is something that I'm really passionate about this year for performers, is the power is with you. I see so many performers feel the imbalance of power in this industry, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of things that need to be addressed, but with a self-tape, you are in control. You have the power, and remember that from the off. You are not answering to anyone. You can take your time with things if that's how you want to do it. And again, I think you made a really interesting point. As I said, it's about framing, but you can stand. If the character isn't really in a sitting position, if that's not how you feel the character would be, as long as the framing's correct, standing gives us so much more sometimes, because you've got your feet kind of really rooted into the ground and you can feel it from the bottom all the way up to the top, that presence of what that what that character would be. So sometimes I think even as a species, we naturally go to sit because it's like a comfort and that's how we do things. But I would say really think about posture in those self-tapes, because all you need is the framing of the head and shoulders. Doesn't matter exactly where you are in regards to physicality, but physicality can completely change a performance, not just physically, but energy-wise as well. And I think that's a really important thing to remember.
Okay, that's good, you know, like, because like so many times you find yourself in that, you know, dilemma. Mm-hmm. And also another thing is like, because in that moment, like you said, you are the creator, so they give you the tools, but then with those tools, you just do whatever you want. So I believe like if you are feeling a different variation of the character, still following the line, maybe it could be useful to send two versions of it. Are you agree with that?
I think it's difficult for those who are self-representing, because obviously you have to kind of choose that scene that you think is the one that most portrays that character and send it over. So you have to make that choice fundamentally yourself. But if you do have an agent, there is absolutely, the opportunity to send two tapes, two contrasting tapes to the agent to see if there's one or the other that they prefer. I think sometimes this is the thing that's also a difficulty for agents, is that they will be having a lot of self-tapes coming in, especially over a weekend when you've had a period of maybe the Thursday to have them submitted for the Monday, and then they spend a lot of the time, then submitting them to the casting director. So, yes, there is always the opportunity to send a couple of tapes to be looked at. And again, if you're self-representing, if you feel really passionately that you've done the scene two different ways, then yes, I would say that. Where I think sometimes frustration lies is you may have done a little slight difference of something, and that's not a big enough change. You've either got to have done, I've done this scene angry and passionate, and then I've also done it kind of like resentful and like withdrawn. Two contrasting things. If you've just altered something slightly, then really you need to choose which tape you feel best portrays and put that forward. But I know it's a kind of, again, a catch-22, but I would say try and not send too many, just because, especially with your agent, they will be going through quite a lot. So if you can make that decision prior, then that's great. But yeah, that is an opportunity as well to do that.
So it's kind of like, what with your gut resonate to be like the strongest one?
I think a lot of people say to me, this is a really interesting question of like, what makes me stand out in a self-tape? Now that is, if I had the answer to that, I would, not be working at Spotlight, be on a desert island with lots of money, because wow, like if I could give you the secret formula to a successful self-tape. And I think the thing that is really frustrating for many performers is what happens with not being in the room anymore is you don't get that reaction. So when I'm sitting here with you now, the body language, the way we interact with each other, that you get a kind of feeling from that. Whereas when you send a self-tape out into the abyss, basically, you have no idea if it's being watched, what they thought of it, all those kind of things. And in the future, like Spotlight has got ideas of how we can improve that, of how, the conversation around yes, no, and feedback on all those kind of things. But I think as a performer, you do just have to make a judgment call there and then. And it may not be the right one, but the main thing with casting is that you send that tape, and if you're not right for that role, you're not right for that role. But getting in front of that casting director, being seen, is such a great thing. Remember that, because they've seen you perform. It might just not be for this particular thing, but they may come back 6 months, 2 years' time and say, oh, I'd love to audition you for this. Now I think this is more your skill set, kind of thing. So remembering that even though the self-tape might not go further right here, right now, it's still that opportunity to showcase your skills to that casting director. And this is going to sound a bit weird as well. Just do what you want to do. Don't try and stand out. Just read the brief and interpret it your way, and then just go for it. The more you try and stand out, the more you try and do a nuance or kind of something different, that's not really, I think, what your first reaction. You're trying to stand out of everybody else's tape, and that's not necessarily what you want. You want to be portraying that character and what that script has asked you to the best of your abilities. So that's what my advice would be. Is, I know that's frustrating because you're like, well, how do I stand out? How does my tape get seen out of the other 50 self-tapes that are being seen? But actually being true to the character is or the description of what you've been given to work with is what will make you stand out.
Also because like once in one podcast I interviewed a director, and I was like, when you choose it, he would say, sometimes you might have like, I put a narrow the people that I like more, but sometimes that is not about like how good you are, it's also in the combination of the other characters. So if I see those three actors interacting between them, and I feel the energy interacting better between them, that is the choice that I do instead. So you might be like, all of the other people that put in there, they were all good, and I will remember them. But the choice is not just about how good you are, but also how it's in the combination of chemistry they can see between the characters.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think that's also the frustrating thing for performers is that you may be doing one of your best performances, but as you say, these two other individuals just have that chemistry, and that's the way that they're going to go with that. There's no actual reason for not getting that job. It's just gone in a different direction because they prefer those two individuals, and that's so, you can't work off that. If someone gives you feedback and goes, you were a little bit too emphasizing a bit too much, or you didn't kind of really get to grips with this emotion, you can go, okay, that's something I can work from. But when it's just like, yeah, you were great, but we just went in another direction, it's like, okay, so there's nothing really to improve there. I've just got to keep going forward. And I think I admire the resilience of actors so much, because you do hear so frequently no's, and you have to be a strong individual who just takes that and goes, that wasn't my next step, let's just keep moving forward. And that is an amazing quality to have. That's not many people in this world have that tenacity, is what I would say, to keep going and keep pushing, even when rejection in life is hard. And I think it's one of those things in life that we don't really talk about. We never talk about our failures. We want to just always be successful and doing okay. But that great podcast with Elizabeth Day, where she talks about her failures and actually how your failures or rejection may actually be the best thing for you. In a weird way, that does make sense sometimes, because you grow from that and then move forward into something else. So at the time it might feel rubbish.
Yeah, but then it's true, with age, I learned this myself, at the beginning, you believe not having any answer. Why don't you reply? It's and then more you go forward, you more understand how is the chain of it's a big chain of people working, and it's nothing personal. It just literally nothing personal. So even your performance, I've been doing once, I remember an audition, I never heard from them for 2 years, because apparently that the production got stopped. And then I received a phone call, oh hi, you did an audition with us, and I was just sleeping, so I woke up and said, I will call you for this role, you got the role. I didn't even audition for that role, I auditioned for something else.
Yeah.
It's in the same production, but they called me for a different character. Yeah. I then forgot about it 2 years later, but they didn't. Yeah. That was the key thing. Yeah. So when you're on this side, you might think, oh yeah, because they see many people, so they will not remember me. But if you do something that somehow have authenticity, I would say, the word, like in life, in everything, there's something authentic, somehow click that memory.
Yeah, it does. And I think the other key thing for me as well, especially I would say to people coming into the industry, is, I don't know, it must be so easy for me to say, but do not compare yourself to others. I know it's so easy to go on social media or to look at your peers and to see Fred got his first West End contract a day after graduating, and you go, well, why wasn't that me? And it is that cliche thing of sometimes that moment for you might not just be now, it might be later down the line. And I also want people to feel like they can come in and out of this industry. I think there's a real stigma around sometimes, especially in performers' minds, that they think, if I leave, I can't come back. And that's absolutely not true. Especially the industry, they know that you may have children, you may have caring responsibilities. Let's be honest, you may just have to go and get a job to get a mortgage to deal with life itself. But that doesn't mean you then have to you can't ever come back. That just means that time, it wasn't, you had to prioritize something else. But now, whenever you feel like it, or, the time frame is right, you can come back into that. And I think that again is something when a lot of people will say to me, oh, I've had this gap on my CV, or I did, and I'm like, it honestly doesn't matter. Casting directors are looking for the right person for that role. And even if you've had a 10-year break and you're coming back in, that doesn't mean anything to them. You could have been doing anything. So I just want to always say to performers, if you need a break, if you need to stop, that's absolutely fine. You can come back whenever that time is right for you.